There's a moment in every connection where everything seems to be going perfectly. The energy is strong, the conversations feel effortless, and you can almost feel her getting closer. And then suddenly she pulls away. She becomes distant, cold, confusing, and you're left wondering what changed. But what if I told you that sometimes distance is not a sign of disinterest? It's actually a sign that her feelings are getting stronger than she knows how to handle. Emotional intensity creates fear, not comfort, because the human mind is naturally wired to protect itself from anything that feels unpredictable, overwhelming, or beyond its control. When a connection starts to deepen, it doesn't just feel exciting on the surface. It begins to activate internal awareness, self-reflection, and emotional exposure that many people are not fully prepared for. What begins as attraction slowly transforms into something heavier, something that carries meaning, expectation, and potential consequences, and that shift alone can trigger a subtle sense of unease. Instead of feeling purely safe in the closeness, she may start to feel like she is standing at the edge of something that could either elevate her emotionally or disrupt her stability. And that uncertainty becomes the source of fear rather than comfort. As emotions intensify, the level of attachment begins to grow in parallel, and attachment inherently comes with the possibility of loss. The mind starts to calculate risks without conscious effort, even when everything appears fine on the outside. Questions begin to surface internally, not always expressed outwardly, but deeply felt within. What if this doesn't last? What if I get too invested? What if I lose control of how I feel? What if I get hurt again? These thoughts don't necessarily come from the present moment, but from accumulated experiences, memories, and emotional imprints that shape how she interprets closeness. So instead of leaning fully into the comfort of the connection, her system begins to create distance as a way to regulate the intensity she is experiencing. Emotional intensity also challenges identity and independence, especially when someone begins to feel that their emotional state is being influenced by another person. When thoughts about you start to appear more frequently, when your presence starts to affect her mood or focus, it introduces a sense of dependency that can feel unfamiliar. Comfort usually exists where there is balance and predictability, but intense emotions disrupt that balance. She may feel like she is losing her usual emotional rhythm, and that disruption can be perceived as instability rather than connection. In response, creating distance becomes a subconscious attempt to restore that sense of self, to breathe again emotionally, and to regain a feeling of control over her internal world. Fear also emerges because emotional intensity increases vulnerability. To care deeply about someone is to open a part of yourself that is not easily protected. It means being seen beyond the surface, being affected in ways that are not always predictable, and allowing another person to hold significance in your emotional landscape. For someone who has experienced disappointment or inconsistency in the past, this level of openness can feel risky. The stronger the feelings become, the higher the perceived stakes, and with higher stakes comes greater caution. Instead of moving forward with ease, she may slow down, observe more carefully, and create subtle emotional barriers. Not because the connection lacks value, but because it holds too much value to ignore the potential consequences that come with it. She distances herself to regain control because emotional involvement naturally introduces a sense of unpredictability that can feel overwhelming when feelings start to deepen beyond a manageable level. When she begins to care, her emotional world becomes more sensitive to your presence, your responses, and the overall dynamic between you both. This heightened sensitivity can create a feeling that her internal balance is no longer entirely in her hands, as external factors start influencing how she feels on a daily basis. In such moments, stepping back is not necessarily about losing interest, but about restoring a sense of emotional stability that feels familiar and safe. Control in this context is not about manipulating the situation or the other person, but about regaining authority over her own emotional state. When she is actively engaging, investing, and responding, she may feel that her emotions are moving faster than her ability to process them. The pace of connection can sometimes exceed her comfort zone, especially if the bond is developing naturally and without clear boundaries. By creating distance, she slows down the emotional momentum, allowing herself to observe, reflect, and recalibrate how deeply she wants to engage without feeling carried away by the intensity of the connection. Another layer to this behavior is the desire to re-establish independence. As emotional attachment grows, there is a subtle shift where thoughts, moods, and attention begin to revolve around the person she is connecting with. This can create an internal tension between wanting closeness and wanting autonomy. Distance becomes a way to remind herself that her identity, her routine, and her emotional well-being are not entirely dependent on the relationship. By pulling back, she re-centers herself, reconnects with her own life, and regains a sense of individuality that may feel slightly blurred when emotions are at their peak. Distance also provides psychological clarity. When she is constantly engaged, it becomes harder to objectively assess how she truly feels, what direction the connection is heading, and whether the dynamic aligns with her expectations. Space allows her to step outside the immediate emotional experience and view things from a more grounded perspective. In that space, she can evaluate your consistency, her own level of attachment, and whether the connection is progressing in a way that feels balanced rather than overwhelming. This pause is not detachment, but a form of internal organization where she sorts through emotions that have become too dense to interpret in constant proximity. At a deeper level, regaining control through distance is also about emotional safety. When feelings intensify, the potential for emotional loss becomes more significant in her perception. By creating space, she reduces the immediacy of that risk, giving herself time to process without feeling exposed. It allows her to regulate how much she gives, how fast she gives it, and how deeply she allows herself to be affected. In this way, distance becomes a tool for maintaining emotional equilibrium, helping her move forward with awareness, rather than being consumed by the intensity of the connection itself. Vulnerability feels like a loss of power because it requires a person to lower their emotional defenses and allow themselves to be seen in a state that is not fully controlled or protected. When she starts to develop genuine feelings, she is no longer just observing the connection from a safe distance. She is now emotionally invested, which means her reactions, expectations, and inner world become tied to something outside of herself. This shift creates a subtle imbalance in perception, where the more she feels, the more she becomes aware that her emotional state is no longer entirely under her command. In that awareness, vulnerability begins to feel like exposure, and exposure is often interpreted as a form of weakness rather than strength, power. In an emotional context, is often associated with control, composure, and the ability to remain unaffected. When she is not deeply attached, she can move freely without overthinking outcomes or fearing emotional consequences. Her responses feel natural, her boundaries remain intact, and her sense of self is stable. However, as vulnerability increases, so does emotional dependency. She may begin to notice that your actions influence her mood more than before, that your attention holds weight, and that your absence creates a noticeable shift within her. This realization can feel unsettling because it reveals that she is no longer fully self-contained in her emotional regulation, and that realization can be perceived as a loss of power over her own inner balance. There is also the fear of being misunderstood or misinterpreted when being vulnerable. When she opens up emotionally, she is revealing parts of herself that are not always visible to others, including her insecurities, her past experiences, and her unspoken expectations. This level of openness requires trust, but trust itself is something that must be built over time. Until that trust feels secure, vulnerability can feel like stepping into uncertainty without guaranteed outcomes. In that state, she may worry about how her openness will be received, whether it will be valued or taken for granted, and whether it might later be used against her. These concerns contribute to the perception that vulnerability reduces her control over how she is perceived and treated. Vulnerability also challenges her emotional independence, which is closely tied to her sense of power. When she allows someone to affect her deeply, she is essentially allowing that person to have influence over her emotional state. This influence, while natural in meaningful connections, can feel like a shift in control from internal to external. Instead of being fully anchored in herself, she becomes partially responsive to another person's presence, energy, and behavior. For someone who values emotional self-sufficiency, this can feel like a compromise of autonomy, as if a part of her emotional authority is now shared rather than solely owned. As a result, she may instinctively create distance when vulnerability begins to increase. This distance is not always a rejection of the connection, but a way to protect her sense of power while she processes the depth of her feelings. By stepping back, she restores a feeling of control over her emotions, reestablishes her boundaries, and gives herself space to engage without feeling overwhelmed by the intensity of being emotionally exposed in a way that feels unfamiliar or too revealing. She tests your emotional stability through distance because, in the realm of meaningful connections, actions often speak louder than words, and your response to her absence or withdrawal reveals more about your character than constant closeness ever could. When a woman begins to care deeply, she becomes acutely aware not only of her own emotions, but also of how the other person manages theirs. Distance, in this sense, is not a form of punishment or a reflection of diminished interest. It is a quiet observation, a subtle gauge of how grounded you remain when the dynamics shift or when uncertainty is introduced. By stepping back, she creates a scenario where she can see whether your sense of self and emotional equilibrium is resilient or fragile, because consistency under pressure is a reflection of long-term reliability. This testing through distance is rooted in her need for security. In any bond, emotional consistency is the foundation of trust. And trust is built not only on shared moments, but also on how each person handles the unknown. When she pulls away, she observes whether you react impulsively, anxiously, or emotionally, or whether you maintain composure, patience, and confidence. Her subconscious mind is evaluating whether your presence is a source of stability or a trigger for chaos. The way you respond in these moments tells her whether you are someone who can handle intensity, someone whose emotional strength complements hers, or someone who crumbles when faced with unpredictability. Another reason she tests through distance is to measure your level of independence and self-assuredness. Emotional stability is often intertwined with self-sufficiency, and she wants to see whether you have the ability to remain grounded even when she is not immediately available. If she notices that you are able to manage your own life, remain focused, and carry yourself with calm confidence despite her absence, it reassures her that she is engaging with someone who is secure, mature, and capable of maintaining balance within the connection. Conversely, if your reactions become erratic, desperate, or reactive, it signals instability, and this may trigger further distance as she instinctively protects her emotional space. Distance also allows her to gauge how genuine your interest is without external pressures or constant reinforcement. In moments of separation, superficial attraction, charm, or momentary excitement cannot sustain the connection. What persists is the true nature of emotional investment. By testing your responses during these pauses, she observes whether your commitment and emotional engagement are authentic or performative. This testing is subtle, often unspoken, but it is highly effective in filtering out those who cannot maintain consistency, patience, and respect under uncertainty. Additionally, testing through distance reflects her own process of self-protection. By creating space, she ensures that she is not fully exposed to someone who might be emotionally unstable, unpredictable, or unreliable. It is her way of managing risk while simultaneously observing whether you have the emotional strength to handle the pressures that naturally arise when feelings deepen. In this sense, distance becomes a mirror that reflects your inner emotional state, revealing patterns, resilience, and the degree to which you can be trusted to remain steady in the face of uncertainty and intensity. Past experiences influence her present reactions because the human mind does not operate in isolation from memory, especially when it comes to emotional connections. Every interaction she has had in the past leaves behind subtle imprints that shape how she interprets similar situations in the present. If she has experienced inconsistency, disappointment, betrayal, or emotional neglect before, those moments do not simply disappear. They become reference points that her subconscious uses to evaluate new connections. So when she begins to feel something deeper, her reactions are not only based on what is happening now, but also on what she has already lived through, creating a layered emotional response that may seem complex or even contradictory from the outside. When she encounters a situation that resembles something from her past, even slightly, her mind can automatically trigger protective responses. These responses are not always logical or intentional. They are often instinctive. For example, if she once opened up to someone who later withdrew or caused emotional pain, she may become more guarded when she starts to feel vulnerable again. Even if the current person has given her no reason to doubt, the memory of past hurt can create hesitation, causing her to slow down, observe more, or create distance as a precaution. This is not because she assumes the worst immediately, but because her emotional system is trying to prevent repetition of a similar outcome. Her present reactions are also influenced by how she learned to cope with emotional experiences in the past. If she developed a habit of protecting herself by withdrawing, staying quiet, or keeping her feelings controlled, those coping mechanisms can resurface automatically when she feels emotionally activated. These patterns become part of her behavioral framework, shaping how she responds to closeness, attention, or increased emotional intensity. Even when she desires connection, there may be an internal conflict between moving forward and protecting herself, resulting in mixed signals, hesitation, or temporary withdrawal. Trust plays a central role in how past experiences influence her current behavior. Trust is not built in isolation. It is reconstructed based on evidence from both past and present. If her past has taught her that emotional investment can lead to disappointment, she may require more time and consistency before fully opening up again. She may test the environment, observe patterns, and look for reassurance through actions rather than words. This cautious approach is not meant to create distance for its own sake, but to ensure that she is not placing her emotional well-being in a situation that mirrors past pain. In this way, her present reactions are a reflection of both her current perception and her accumulated emotional history. The depth of her responses is shaped by experiences that have taught her what to value, what to avoid, and what to be cautious about. So when she becomes distant, hesitant, or selectively expressive, it is often less about the present moment alone and more about the silent influence of memories that continue to guide her internal sense of safety and decision-making in relationships. The more she values you, the more cautious she becomes, because emotional value naturally increases the sense of responsibility she feels toward the connection. When someone becomes important to her, the dynamic is no longer casual or surface level. It carries meaning, expectations, and emotional weight that she cannot ignore. With that increased significance comes a heightened awareness of potential outcomes, both positive and negative. She is no longer interacting freely without attachment. Instead, she is now mindful that her actions, decisions, and level of involvement can influence something she genuinely cares about. This awareness introduces caution, not as a sign of detachment, but as a reflection of how much the connection matters to her. As her valuation of you grows, she begins to observe more carefully rather than react impulsively. She may take more time to respond, think more deeply about her words, and evaluate the direction of the interaction with greater attention. This is because when something holds less value, there is little risk involved in how it unfolds, but when something is meaningful, every step feels more significant. She becomes more selective with her energy, not because she wants to withdraw, but because she wants to ensure that what she invests aligns with her emotional standards and long-term expectations. This selective approach often appears as distance, but internally it is a process of alignment rather than disengagement. Caution also arises from the awareness that higher value increases vulnerability. The more she values you, the more she stands to lose if things do not go as expected. This creates a natural tendency to protect herself from potential disappointment. Instead of rushing into deeper emotional involvement, she may slow down to observe consistency, behavior patterns, and overall reliability. She is looking for stability, not just in moments of excitement, but in how the connection holds up over time. This cautious observation allows her to build trust gradually rather than emotionally investing at a pace that feels risky or overwhelming. Another aspect of this caution is the internal balancing act between desire and self-protection. While she may feel drawn toward you, enjoy your presence, and value the connection, she is also aware of the emotional implications of becoming too invested too quickly. This creates a dual awareness where one part of her wants to move closer, while another part urges restraint. The result is measured behavior, controlled engagement, and sometimes intermittent distance, all of which are ways of maintaining equilibrium while processing the depth of her feelings. Her caution is also a reflection of respect for the value she assigns to the connection. When something is meaningful, it is treated with care rather than impulsiveness. She becomes more thoughtful about how the relationship develops, more attentive to red flags or inconsistencies, and more conscious of maintaining emotional boundaries until she feels secure. This careful approach ensures that her investment is not misplaced and that the connection she is nurturing has the stability required to grow without unnecessary risk or emotional turbulence. Across all these dynamics, the pattern becomes clear. Distance is rarely as simple as it appears on the surface. What may look like disinterest is often internal processing, emotional regulation, or a protective response triggered by growing feelings. As emotional intensity rises, so does the need for control, safety, and clarity. Vulnerability begins to feel heavier, past experiences begin to echo in present reactions, and the connection itself starts to carry more meaning, which naturally leads to increased caution rather than careless engagement. Her behavior reflects an ongoing balance between wanting closeness and preserving emotional stability. When she distances herself, she is not always withdrawing from the connection itself, but rather managing the depth of her own feelings, testing the reliability of the dynamic, and ensuring that what she is investing in is aligned with her emotional expectations. The space she creates becomes a tool for observation, reflection, and self-regulation, allowing her to move forward with a sense of control rather than emotional overwhelm. In this context, distance, caution, and even inconsistency are not random actions, but expressions of a deeper psychological process where feelings are growing, awareness is increasing, and the stakes feel higher. The stronger the connection becomes, the more carefully it is approached, because what holds value is treated with awareness, not impulsiveness, and what feels meaningful is handled with a level of protection that ensures emotional balance is maintained throughout the experience.